So my name is Darcy Reppin, and I live in Telqua, and I have been researching and advocating for changes in the fairness of rural ICBC rates for several years now.
Okay. And to get right into it, the letter that you shared with me, could you describe that letter and the purpose of the letter, the one that you wrote to MLA Nathan Cullen regarding the disparity in policy premium claims?
Yeah, so I mean, the purpose of the letter obviously is trying to engage our MLA, and I have similar communications with other rural MLAs as well as municipal politicians to really highlight what is going on in terms of the disparity in rural versus urban ICBC rates when you consider the premiums that are paid in and the claims that come out. So that letter is a summary of overall the issues that people in rural areas face in terms of not just the insurance, but other associated costs with owning and driving a vehicle in rural areas.
Okay. And as a way to introduce people to finding out about this, can you explain some of those disparities and the differences in claims paid by rural versus urban drivers?
Well, the biggest one is with the support of dozens of people in rural BC, we were able to access data from ICBC that they were pretty reluctant to release. And so recently I finally got the full summary, thanks again to the support of the Union of BC Municipalities and other people asking for that information. And the disparity is quite shocking. Basically, people in the Vancouver and Southern Vancouver Island area, they're paying about $1.35 for every dollar that they get in claims payouts, and that's over a 6-year period from 2014 to 2019. People in rural areas are paying 49 cents more. So $1.84 for every dollar that's paid out in those rural areas in claims. Mm-hmm. And really, when you look at some of the urban areas, they're full on getting subsidized by other rate payers and policyholders in terms of their ICBC costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my conversation with BV Insurance, that's exactly what I was told as well. So there is a disparity in claims for rural and urban drivers in BC, but as you know, come May, all BC insured drivers will be paying on average about 30% lower for their insurance. But the broker that I spoke to said that we in the North should still be paying less than what we do, and that there is a 10-year plan for that to happen. But in your letter that I wrote, you claim that rural BCers basically you're saying that we should not be subsidizing urban centers such as Vancouver, and how do you think that ICBC should go about that?
Well, I think the broker at BV Insurance touched on it. Why do we need to wait for 10 years and continue to overpay for all of those years when ICBC is clearly willing to make massive adjustments? In the past, they've raised our rates across the board by 5.5%, 6.3%, 6.5% in a year. And yet they're saying they don't want to have rate shock for the Lower Mainland, and so they're capping it at 1% a year on their territorial adjustment. And to me, on just a basic fairness level, that makes no sense whatsoever. It's the perfect time for ICBC to make the adjustment because they're already doing a huge reduction. There's not going to be a negative impact on urban ratepayers because what they would see as an increase is going to fall below that 15% decrease. But for rural BC, I mean, when you look at the cumulative amount, you're talking about $330 million a year on average over those 6 years that's being sucked out of our rural economy and going to ICBC either to subsidize other ratepayers in urban areas and also just to try and balance the books at ICBC. And in the past, before they were losing money, certainly that was money coming straight out of our pockets and going straight into Victoria's general revenues to manage government services. So There's something fundamentally wrong with that. We should, especially because we're forced to buy our insurance, it's a monopoly, we should be treated fairly, and that's actually in their mission statement over and over again. So, for me, I'm really just seeking for them to acknowledge what they have said they intend to do or what their objective is, and live up to that.
So, do you have any, when seeing these changes and to be changing over to a no-fault insurance system, do you have any issue with that change in particular, or is it just that because there are more conversations, rates are being lowered, you're now kind of almost acting on your chance, or more people are talking about this?
I don't think that more people are talking about it. We're going on more than 4 years now, and really this kind of started back when I was still mayor of Telkwa, and we were recognizing the disparity that happened in terms of territorial dividing lines. So for me, the shift to no fault is really, it's a separate topic entirely. I understand why ICBC is going with that route, and I don't actually have an issue with it. It's not going to correct that inequity, though, because the source of the inequity is actually the frequency of accidents and especially injuries on a per capita basis in the urban areas compared to the rural areas. That's the source of the disparity that I'm looking at. So, yeah, really what it is, though, is it's an excellent opportunity to just, that 10-year gradual 1% adjustment, it's the perfect opportunity to just go, we're just going to fix it now. Like, why would we be charging people who have been overpaying for probably decades for another 8 years? It just seems like a real injustice to people living in rural areas that the government just feels like, oh, whoopsie, we were overcharging you, but we're going to keep overcharging you. It's a crazy thing to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel in your conversations with, MLAs, MPs, and ICBC, do you feel like you're heard when you're explaining this to them?
Yeah, the answer to that is, am I being heard? I know that I'm being heard on the behind closed doors level. That's demonstrated by their resistance to both releasing information and to answering the questions, straight up. So I know I'm being heard loud and clear. The issue is one, I believe, of politics, where they have a fear of increasing those urban rates because those urban votes are what form BC's government. So in terms of the individual conversations, today I had a conversation with Nathan Cullen. I can tell you it's definitely the most productive conversation that I've had with either of our local MLAs. So I've had 2 conversations with MLA Cullen now, and this most recent one, again, was a commitment to actually, take it to the people who can answer some questions at ICBC or at the ministry. Over 4 years, I've brought this disparity up, and they've always sort of stepped around giving a straight response to it. And that is both a frustration because there's no movement, but also really showing clearly that it's accurate. And again, it's something that is definitely corroborated by the actual accident and injury stats.
What are the areas that you're advocating for?
So I actually split it into 3, and the population centers, including the Fraser Valley, Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows, Kelowna, Kamloops, Nanaimo, and Prince George, were slightly less subsidized than the Vancouver and Victoria area, but definitely nowhere near the same issue as rural BC. So basically, rural areas, $1.84, urban areas, $1.35, and the other areas, $1.46. So, an 11-cent difference where they're paying more than the urban areas. But I think what we'd look at is, should we be splitting it into 2 or even 3 pools? And I would suggest that potentially splitting ICBC into 2 pools is definitely an option. The other option would be to simply take the postal codes, because they already have the data, and then basically average the 5 years and prorate it each year as they move forward and go, we're going to set a very strong territorial or postal code rate based on what people are actually paying and receiving in those postal codes. It's a complex topic, and so it's definitely challenging for me. Obviously, I've spent a lot of time in it, and I am a number cruncher. But I think the bigger picture for people in rural BC is just to ask why they're being required to pay more money for their auto insurance, and to think about that impact. Per person in rural BC, you're talking about well over $400 a year. And that's money that could be better spent in our rural economies than going into the money pit that is ICBC.
Okay, well, Darcy, thank you so much for your time. Okay, bye-bye.
Have a great afternoon. Bye.
All right, and that was our producer Pam speaking with MLA Nathan Cullen, as well as insurance advocate Darcy Reppin, about the changes coming to ICBC and switching to a no-fault insurance system as of May 2021. Chris, a lot of the issue there that Darcy has been talking about for many years is about the disparity between the rural payments coming from rural drivers versus that of urban drivers, and that the rural drivers are subsidizing, in a lot of cases, urban drivers, but that doesn't seem to play too much into this issue of changing over to this new no-fault insurance system, but still something that is very important to Darcy and many others. But also, as you heard from Nathan Cullen, this is almost a complete overhaul of the whole system, and it looks like at the end of the day, more money will be saved and possibly better care will be the outcome.
Well, I'd say that's Darcy's point. This is almost a complete overhaul of the system, and a big part was missed out. He's been banging the drum for a while, and it sounds like the beat goes on, because this is not going to be solved with this big change. It's going to clean up a bit of the mess, some of the headaches, some of the cash crunches that ICBC has had the last few years, which is interesting because when you look across the country on other publicly owned insurance companies when it comes to auto insurance, they don't have this big of an issue. Usually, actually, they're rolling in the dough and can have quite low rates, and at the same time not be in such financial trouble. But I guess just the last decade or so, it's been something has happened in just the system. So hopefully this fixes that. But like I said, and like Darcy said, the rural rate, metro rate, city rate is still a big issue. Darcy, of course, former mayor of Telkwa, knows about this because that dividing line in insurance rates is right between Smithers and Telkwa. Smithers gets the Northwest rate, Telkwa gets the Prince George rate, and it's quite a bit different. So and it's drawn that way because got to put it somewhere. It's pretty much the reason ICBC gives. So maybe not very satisfying for most rural drivers east of Smithers. But we'll see if they actually finally get to that. I know Darcy knows a lot about this. He reads up on it. And if anybody follows both Darcy Reppin and Premier John Horgan, you will see that every time Premier John Horgan talks about anything, there will be a comment about rural rates in ICBC.
And I mean, when we're talking about insurance, you obviously know that I've spoken with Darcy Reppin. So he says that while the insurance rates are a positive change, and that he's very happy that these changes are in effect, that ICBC still needs to have rates that reflect accident rates and claims more accurately for rural drivers without the subsidies. So what do you say to that?
Well, I spoke with Darcy, I think just last week, and it provided me with decks and tables and tables and tables, and we're going to take them up with ICBC and explain, how is it that rates are calculated for the North and rural BC? It looks like we have fewer and less costly accidents when we do have accidents, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. I think some people had an initial bias that rural drivers, because we're more often on highways, driving faster, would have much more dangerous, much more serious accidents. But it turns out it's not the case. That in the Lower Mainland and places like that, there's so much more traffic. Any kind of accident with the way cars are now automatically, has a pretty significant cost to it. So I think the questions he's asking are good ones. I, of course, have to be careful as a legislator that I'm not saying this town or that constituent or this group of people over here deserve to get a break because that's the old way of doing politics. We want it to be fair across the board. And I think the changes we've made, making ICBC more accountable and much more transparent in the way that they take in money and the way they put out insurance claims, is better. We've also introduced a tribunal so that there's an independent tribunal from ICBC when there's a dispute, when someone wants to challenge what's happened, that it's not ICBC being the one playing judge, jury, as much as it has in the past.
I mean,